I want to thank everybody for being with us this evening for what's the second of 5 virtual programs that our office is hosting through the months of February and March. Again, this is part of the 5 programs that we are doing are part of the Freedom exhibit, Freedom, a Promise Disrupted exhibit that is at our office in Asheville, 176 Riceville Road. As Dr. Fox talks, as I have in the past, I will put a couple of links in the chat box so that folks watching can click and look over some information if they wish, or check it out a little bit later. But that exhibit will be at our office through the end of March. It's open Wednesday through Saturday, closed on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, but open Wednesday through Saturday from 10 to 2. And again, that was an exhibit that was prepared by the North Carolina Museum of History back in 2019 and was in Raleigh during that year, and has kind of morphed into a bit of a traveling exhibit and has went around the state to a couple of locations. It's actually supposed to go back down to Eastern North Carolina at a couple of our museum sites down there through the rest of 2022 and into 2023. So these 5 programs, this is the second, is kind of part of that exhibit. The other 3 that I'll mention really quickly here is March the 10th. Dr. Steve Nash will be back with us. Dr. Nash did our first program. He will be back with us on the 10th to talk about the Ku Klux in Western North Carolina. And then on March 17th, Earl Imes, who is our curator of African American collection at the Museum of History in Raleigh and who did a lot of the work on the Freedom exhibit, will be talking with us on March the 17th about Black Republicans in North Carolina and the Convention of 1868. And then on March 31st, our last program that we have scheduled will be Dr. Dan Pierce from UNCA, professor of history at UNCA, and Ansley Whittle, who's in the Special Collections Department at UNCA, will be talking about the rail project, the railroad African American incarcerated laborers project that has tried to remember, acknowledge, and honor, to use the same words from Dr. Fox's presentation this evening, to acknowledge, remember, and honor the individuals, the African American individuals who died in the construction of the railroad from Old Fort up to Black Mountain, up to Asheville. So that'll be on the 31st. But tonight we have with us Dr. Joseph Fox. His topic, Buncombe County, the Buncombe County Remembrance Project, acknowledging, remembering, and honoring lynching victims. We appreciate his being with us and agreeing to talk with us this evening. Dr. Fox is the owner of Fox Management Consulting Enterprises, LLC, possesses a doctorate of education, an MBA from Western Carolina University, and a BS degree in business administration from Pfeiffer University. He's done numerous things here in Buncombe County, a lot of different projects. I could go on and on about that, but I will certainly mention that he has been chair of the Asheville Martin Luther King Jr. Peace March and Rally Committee for many years, for several years, and he chairs the Buncombe County Remembrance Project. Before I turn it over to Dr. Fox, just want to mention logistically, encourage folks, if you have questions, to use the Q&A, and we will address those as we go through the presentation. This is being recorded, so if you have an interest or know of others that may have an interest later on, the recording will be available on the North Carolina Department of Natural and Cultural Resources YouTube channel, along with all of the recordings of all 5 of our presentations. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Fox, and I will be quiet for a little bit.
Thank you, Jeff. And I'm happy to be with you this evening as we talk about the Remembrance Project. I'm going to share my screen, and we will view a PowerPoint as we talk about the events this evening. We are small in numbers, so if you have questions, definitely put those in the Q&A, and we can address those as we start the project and go through our presentation this evening, or we can address some of those at the end. But if I'm on a particular topic and you have a burning question, please don't hesitate to put it in the section. So I wanted to give you a little history of how the Remembrance Project got started. I'm currently the vice president of the board for the Martin Luther King Jr. Association of Asheville and Buncombe County, really the outgoing vice president, but had said that I would stay on until we completed this project, and then my replacement will rotate on. But the actual project started in September 2018 when there was community representation from a number of groups that met to discuss the Equal Justice Initiative around the work that Brian Stevenson was doing. And it grew out of an article that had been published in the Mountain Express in late August of 2018. So several groups were meeting throughout Asheville, including our board at the MLK Association of Asheville and Buncombe County. And as that was occurring, we really looked at who was taking the lead in the organization in terms of the project, and decided that a collaborative approach would be a better approach versus individual groups working in silos. And so we pulled together a group of those initial folks that were interested in the project. The Martin Luther King Jr. Association was asked to take the lead role as one of the African American organizations in Asheville and Buncombe County. And so we reached out to the Equal Justice staff and started the initial paperwork around becoming the lead organization, pulling together folks around the project. It is a part of the Equal Justice Initiative National Memorial for Peace and Justice. And so towards the end, we'll talk about a planned trip that we are looking at taking community folks to view the actual museum. And then we started thinking about what is our overall goal, our overall arching goal of the project. And we said, we really want to acknowledge and remember individuals of record that were lynched in Buncombe County. And we distinguished the word of record to say that we know that there were other acts of violence that were perpetrated based on race, but we really wanted to say in our project, we had to fit the project guidelines of the Equal Justice Initiative. So of record means that it had to be individuals, that it had been documented in newspapers, there had been archives. You could go to the archives and find documents. And so we used the term of record, recognizing that there were other folks that had been victimized. And so as we really started working with our various stakeholders, and we really ended up with two major groups at the initial start. We had our initial stakeholder group, which were the folks that the organizations throughout Asheville and Buncombe County that had initially been at the table discussing the project. And so we asked those individuals to have a representation and form a steering committee. And then we had our community stakeholders group, which was anyone in the local community that just wanted to learn more about the project. So our steering committee came up with these following goals to more accurately reflect history of racial and economic injustice and inequalities, to foster healings from the silent trauma surrounding racial violence. And so we broadened our span of the project to also look at research around the Jim Crow trauma, actual lynchings, mass incarcerations, violence in communities, state sanctions, violence, and police brutality. And we wanted to move beyond just looking at some historical facts, but to actually foster local conversations related and reflection concerning community healing, to recognize that communities had been traumatized as a whole, and individuals personally had been traumatized, and then to foster community healing through truth-telling, educational programming, reconciliation events, and transformative narratives. So prior to COVID-19, we were able to have 3 or 4 town hall type meetings throughout the communities where folks were able to come, share their stories, share their memories, and learn more about the project. As we went into lockdown because of COVID-19, we really switched to using Zoom meetings, using Zoom trainings. We started using the MLK Association website to post information, and Ron Katz was instrumental in helping us create and develop an e-newsletter that comes out monthly, just not only discussing issues around the Remembrance Project, but touching on some of these other project goals areas that we had broadened our scope to. We developed a YouTube channel with the assistance of Aisha Adams Media Group. We sponsored some folks to go on the Astral View to discuss the project. And so we really tried to involve the community as much as possible around the research, the learning, the discussion around the overall goals of the project. So the Equal Justice Initiative research, their guidelines, they realized that there was an uptick in racial violence right after the Civil War. And so to have a defined period in which to research lynching throughout the United States, but particularly in the South, they used that time period between 1877 and 1950. Their initial research indicated that more than 4,400 African men, women, and children were hanged, burnt alive, shot, drowned, and beaten to death between that time period. And again, to fit their research period, we had to find documentation of some of this violence. And then more recently, the Equal Justice Initiative has released an updated report entitled Around Reconstruction in America, and have documented an additional 2,000 plus individuals that were victims of racial terror lynchings. And I should distinguish their research around racial terror lynchings. So they did not research lynchings that were the results of a court case, of a hearing, but these were the lynchings where there was a mob mentality, where the victims were pulled off of trains, pulled off out of jails, cells, and lynched without due process. So they do make that distinction around individuals that went to trial, was found guilty of a offense, and then lynched. Millions more fled the South as refugees from racial terrorism. And then the lynchings were a part of the violence and public acts of torture. And I know that as an individual of a Dr. Hugh, I get asked a lot of times with presentations around some of the work that I do around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Why does it seem that individuals of color, individuals of a Dr. Hugh or darker pigmentation sometimes don't feel comfortable in downtown areas throughout cities in the United States, not only in the South. Um, and my answer has been, it had been an unwelcome, excuse me, an unwelcome place for many individuals of a Dr. Hugh, starting back initially with our Native Americans, our first people, particularly in our area, the Cherokee, and then later, individuals of a Dr. Hugh, as well as the gender bias that occurred, and women not being really welcome in those spaces. And so these terror acts were very public, where local town folks would come, bring their children, bring their wives, and really have a picnic and a public display of the hangings. And the research shows that terror lynching peaked between 1880 and 1940. The more updated research by the Equal Justice Initiative said that over the past 6 years, as they have spent more than thousands of hours researching additional documents, they found that the 12 most active lynching states in America during that time period was Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, both North and South Carolina, Tennessee, and Texas and Virginia. They continued some of the more current research and found that it showed that terror lynchings in other states other than the ones that they initially found in their research, and these were most common in the following additional states, 8 additional states: Illinois, Indiana, Kansas, Maryland, Missouri, Ohio, Oklahoma, and West Virginia. And so as they continue to look at research, they know that a lot of the lynchings and racial terrorism was based in the South, but there was also racial violence occurring in some of the northern states also. And so their findings indicated that, again, terror lynchings, again, to distinguish those lynchings from cases that were heard by the courts, people were found guilty, etc. But it had the following traits. It resulted from a widely distorted fear of interracial sex. And so that was one way to whip up the crowds, to whip up the mob. The lynchings was in response to casual social transgressions, particularly males of a darker pigmentation, looking at a white woman, speaking to a white woman, getting on an elevator and not looking down, casual social transgressions. In fact, I recall a conversation that I had recently in the last few years with a classmate that I had gone to high school with. And we were talking about some of these casual social transgressions. And he mentioned that it still today angers him that his recently passed granddad would, in the presence of anybody white, would just instinctively look down and not make eye contact. And he said, we've moved beyond that, but that's still part of who he is. And I've tried to talk to him about doing that. And he said, and what really gets me is when we come across a family with kids and the parents have known him, and the granddad was named John. And he said, and even the kids would say, "Hey, Johnny, how are you doing?" And he said, and he said his granddad would respond, but he felt like it just was not a way to show respect. And I said, well, you have to realize that he grew up in a time period where just the wrong reaction of a social transgression could mean death for you. Another fact or trait that they found was that It usually was based on allegations of a serious violent crime, public spectrum of lynchings, lynchings that escalated into large-scale violence, and then lynchings of sharecroppers, ministers, and community leaders who resisted or mistreatment were common between 1915 and 1940. So I'm going to pause here to see, Jeff, do we have any questions thus far?
No, we don't have any questions at this time, so we're good.
Okay, great. So we're going to continue. And so part of what we did is we had the members of the Equal Justice Initiative participate in our actual installation service. And so these are the three young ladies that we worked more one-on-one with when we were doing the various projects. So I want to pause here and play this video. And Jeff, give me a thumbs up to make sure that everybody can hear it. At this time, we're going to have greetings from several of the staff members from the Equal Justice Initiative that are with us today. And I must say that it has been a pleasure working with these three young ladies around this project for the last 2.5 years. And I'll let them introduce themselves.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fox. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kiana. I'm a Justice Fellow at the Equal Justice Initiative, and I, along with my colleagues, Sion and Kayla, are really pleased to be here with you all today to join you in dedicating these three very important and permanent educational tools in the community. The Equal Justice Initiative is a human rights organization dedicated to ending mass incarceration and challenging racial and economic injustice in our society. We were originally founded in 1989 when our executive director, Attorney Brian Stevenson, came to Montgomery, Alabama, where we're based, to defend people on Alabama's death row. We're an anti-death penalty organization. We believe that capital punishment should not exist, especially given the racially discriminatory ways in which it has been administered, both historically and today. We also believe that everybody is more than the worst thing that they've ever done. And so we continue that work as an anti-death penalty organization, but we've also expanded our work to include challenging the excessive punishment of children, also challenging the inhumane and unconstitutional prison conditions throughout the state of Alabama, and providing reentry services for our clients so that they can have a meaningful life after incarceration. So after about 20 years of doing this work, we realized that in order to effectively address the racial and economic injustices we're seeing with our clients and within the context of the criminal legal system, that we were actually going to have to take a step back and do a deeper dive into our nation's history of racial injustice, because we believe the challenges that we're seeing in the criminal legal system are deeply rooted in this history. And so in 2008, we started a public history initiative. We began doing a lot of research into our nation's history, starting with Montgomery and the role that Montgomery played in the domestic slave trade, and then expanding that to a national scale. And then in 2018, we actually established two very important cultural sites, including the Legacy Museum and the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, which Dr. Simmons just mentioned. The National Memorial for Peace and Justice stands in memory of the over 4,400 victims, Black victims of racial terror lynching between the end of Reconstruction in 1877 and 1950. And the Legacy Museum traces the history of enslavement all the way to present day mass incarceration. So I'm gonna hand it over to Kayla to talk a little bit more about this history.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Kayla Vincent, and I'm a staff attorney at the Equal Justice Initiative. And I just want to talk a little bit more about what my colleague Kiana was just saying about the fact that EJI didn't come to this work as public historians, but rather as legal advocates who had already spent 2 decades trying to help courts and other actors in the criminal justice system understand how the outcomes that our clients were facing were really about that race and wealth were really impacting those outcomes. And it just became clear to us that part of the problem was that as a nation, people didn't know this history, and people were too comfortable with the really intolerable and inhumane things that our clients face on a daily basis. And so that is what pushed us to want to invite people to join us on this journey of understanding the history of racial injustice in this country, of understanding that at EJI we believe that slavery never ended, it simply evolved, and that one of the systems that it evolved into was the era of racial terror lynching, which is a time period where this myth of Black dangerousness, this idea that a racial democracy was impossible in the United States, the foundational commitment to white supremacy and racial hierarchy continued when it didn't have to. And that continuance led to, between 1865 and 1877, the lynchings of at least 2,000 Black people. In an era where the deaths of Black people were so poorly documented, there are very likely many more who we do not know. And then ushered in an era of racial terror lynching where at least 4,500 Black people lost their lives, including Mr. Humphreys, Mr. Rankin, and Mr. Brackett. And we know that this myth of Black dangerousness was invoked in order to justify brutal acts of white domination. It was never about dangerousness. It was about white supremacy. And our executive director often talks about the death penalty as a stepchild of lynching because of the relationships between the two, because of the fact that some of the states with the highest rates of lynching during the lynching era today have the highest rates of death penalty sentences. And so when we think about what it means to fully memorialize these three men today and to honor the conditions of life that they endured, that means we have to also have a commitment to ending the era of mass incarceration. Because today in the state of North Carolina, it is still possible for a person to be sentenced to death. It is possible for a child as young as 6 to enter the criminal justice system. And as a nation, we have our prison population has grown from 1972, it was about 200,000 people. Today, it is 2.3 million. If you include people who are on probation and parole, that number exceeds 7 million. This is not about public safety. It is about a myth of Black dangerousness that turned into a law and order politics that today is preventing us from being safer. So for people who wonder and would like to believe that had they been alive during the era of racial terror lynching, that they would have been insisting that it end, that they would have been with Ida B. Wells Barnett, they would have been with the NAACP and insisting that this era end, you don't have to wonder what you would have done if you lived during an era of a massive racial injustice, because you currently live in an era of massive racial injustice. So the answer to that question is, what are you doing today? And we believe that this project that Sian is going to talk about in a moment is a really important step to really beginning that process of repair in our country. So we're very grateful to you all for joining us today, for joining a national conversation and insisting that Asheville and Buncombe County can be a different place.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here with us today. I'm Sian Blackwell, and I'm a Justice Fellow at the Equal Justice Initiative. I just thank my colleague, Kayla, for really giving you all that invitation to join this work and to really come and join us in this work of fighting racial injustice in this era. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit about the Community Remembrance Project, which you are here today for, in Buncombe County, and how this work has grown nationally from the Equal Justice Initiative. So it's one of our core beliefs that you have to be proximate to this work. You have to be proximate to the issues of racial injustice and inequality in order to make real change. And we believe that when we were doing this research and we were documenting over the 6,500 victims of racial terror lynching, we realized that this history was local. It was happening in individual communities, and people weren't talking about it. They were distancing themselves from it. And we realized that this is something that is crucial for communities individually to recognize. Just right here in Buncombe County, you have 3 documented victims. And we really appreciate the work that Dr. Fox and Dr. Simmons and everyone on the Buncombe Community Remembrance Project has done thus far to recognize these victims. We have 3 projects: a soil collection project, the racial justice essay contest, and the historical marker ceremonies. And this community has already completed the soil collection project, as you see here, the 3 jars that were collected back in May. And we had a record number of students participate in the racial justice essay contest. And now for all of you being here today, it's so wonderful to see so many faces here to recognize these men. And I hope you go on the journey with us to unveil these markers. But I ask of you all to think about where does it, as Kayla mentioned, where do you go next? If you have a neighbor, a family member, or a friend who's not here, mention these men's names by name to them. Ask them what, do they know these stories? Bring them to these markers. Make sure that they engage, because our community remembrance work is a long-term commitment. Even though this community has already finished the 3 projects, it doesn't end here. This work is never finished because we are currently in this era of racial injustice. We are in the era of mass incarceration. And so I just ask you all to really stay engaged, stay involved, and think about your community when we're doing this work. And come and visit us in Montgomery as well at the Legacy Museum from Enslavement to Mass Incarceration, and at the National Memorial for Peace and Justice. And I really just want to say thank you again for being here, and I hope that you really reflect on this history as we say these men's names today and we go to these markers. So thank you all again for being here.
So as you see, we had a good turnout, even though it was raining. It was a wet, cold day in downtown Asheville, and we had probably about 500 people that turned out to recognize these 3 men. And so I wanted to share with you a little bit of their story. So John Humphreys, and in the research you'll find 2 different spellings for Mr. Humphreys. I know our search committee, research committee really was back and forth on which names we should use. And Jeff, I'm going to pause here. I see that you popped on to see if there was a question.
Yes, we do have one question. Let me see if I can have her come on here. Let's see. See, I may need, Matt, are you still with us? I was trying to see if I can.
I am allowing Monique to talk right now.
There we go.
And Monique, you are muted.
No, I didn't have a question. I had just put thank you in the chat, and I put up my hand when you said indicate 2 thumbs up that you heard what you said before. I'm sorry about that.
Okay,
Oh, that's
not a problem.
okay. No problem.
Yeah, and I'm not monitoring the chat because if I click on it, it throws the PowerPoint off. So, okay, well, thank you. And thank you for joining us. And Dr. Monique Taylor is the treasurer for the MLK Association of Asheville and Buncombe County. So I'm delighted to see some of my co-board members with us today. So Mr. John Humphreys was lynched on 7/15/1888. I make the distinction of saying Mr., even though he was only 17, or let's see, he was only 19-year-old. So on Sunday, July the 15th, 1888, a mob of 25 to 40 white men lynched John Humphreys, a 19-year-old Black teenager. About an hour earlier, the mob violently broke into the county jail and really took him out from that jail and hung him in a tree near the jail. And so when we looked at the placement of historical markers, we attempted to put those markers throughout the areas where they were either at the site of a lynching or near the lynching. On July the 14th, 1888, a white girl reported that she had been assaulted in the northern suburbs of Asheville while on her way from home. She told the police that earlier that day, She had been attacked by a Black man who had on a striped shirt and was barefooted. That later that night around 9, some members of the manhunt came upon Mr. Humphreys, and here he's wearing a coat, white shirt, and shoes, which didn't fit the description, but he was nevertheless arrested and assaulted for the assault. To secure a positive identification, he was forced to put on a striped shirt and remove his shoes before being taken for her identification. And so you can imagine she identified him. And so again, this is a lynching of record. So I wanted to just show you a slide, and this is not all of the citations that went along with this particular case, but these are all of the sources where articles was written about this actual mob attack and him, Mr. Humphreys, being pulled out of the jail and hung by a tree. We also have Mr. Hezekiah Rankin, who was 18 or 19. It was kind of in reading the articles and doing the research, some reported 18, some reported 19. But on the night of September the 24th, 1891, a mob of at least 20 unmasked white men lynched Mr. Rankin, who had been a brakeman at the local railroad depot. The mob had dragged him down the railroad tracks at the actual depot, stabbed him in the shoulder, and hanged him to his death on a tree west of French Broad River. And so his actual marker is down near the French Broad River at the intersection of Emma Road and Craven Street. That was the site that we could find most closely to the location that was reported in the articles. He had been working in the railroad where he got into a disagreement with a white co-worker. Supposedly there was some violence that occurred. Mr. Rankin refused the request and explained that it was not his responsibility. In response to Mr. Rankin telling him no, the white hoster yelled at Mr. Rankin and threw a lump of coal at him, striking him in the face. Mr. Rankin returned to his boarding house where he washed the blood off his face, told the lady that ran the boarding house about what had happened, went back to the tracks where he had a second encounter in which the witnesses reported that he was verbally abused. Again, Mr. Rankin fired a bullet that struck the hoster in his abdomen and was arrested and eventually lynched. And again, I just wanted to, give you all the various citations that documented this particular lynching. And then we have Bob Brackett. Bob Brackett was 19, I believe. On August the 11th, or actually, I'm sorry, he was 23. On August the 11th, 1897, a mob of about 50 to 60 armed, unmasked white men abducted him. He was a farmer. The mob then marched him approximately 12 miles by foot and hanged him on a tree near a schoolhouse in the broad daylight with about 1,000 people looking on. I will say that our research committee found that in several articles, it had a lesser number of people that were bystanders and others that were more. And so we went with the actual reported number that the Equal Justice Initiative provided us in their research. Although men were identified as being involved in the lynching, no one was ever convicted of murdering Mr. Brackett. A few days prior to that, a white woman had reported that a black man had sexually assaulted her while she was walking on her way near Weaverville, North Carolina. So this particular case took place near, if you know where the Vance Memorial Homestead is, it was about a mile, a couple miles from that. At that point, it was a school and is now a church property. And so in looking at the soil collection piece of this, because it was on private property and there was some agreement around allowing us to remove soil from that area, or I should say uncomfortable dialogue, we decided that we would actually do the soil collection near the railroad tracks, the old depot at the top of coming into Black Mountain, in that area where he was actually pulled from the train. And then again, like to show that, this was a well-documented case in various newspapers throughout Western North Carolina, as well as the East in Raleigh. And so as we looked at the research and started working with the staff of the Equal Justice Initiatives, as I mentioned earlier, we formed two main groups. We had our community stakeholders group, which was about 18 plus organizations, groups, and individuals that made up that committee, that community stakeholders groups, that we were able to meet several times before the COVID-19 pandemic in person to start sharing the research that the Equal Justice Initiative staff was sharing with us, to discuss community trauma, personal trauma, remembrance of victims, whether documented or undocumented, and strategies for moving our community forward in terms of healing. Our steering committees was formed by mainly individuals that were in that original community stakeholders group. So we had individuals from MAHAC, one individual from MAHAC, one individual from University of North Carolina, Asheville, the city, the county, the various colleges throughout Asheville and Buncombe County, and then faith-based organizations, et cetera, all came together as the steering committee to set really policy of moving forward, governance of moving forward, and really a strategic plan on how to accomplish the three projects that you heard the staff of the Equal Justice Initiative speak about on the video. And so from that, we formed these various work groups. We formed the communication PR work group, and that work group was made up of community stakeholders. And so at each of our stakeholders group meetings, we shared a list of all of the work groups, the tasks that they would be doing, and asked for community volunteers to sign up to be part of one of those communities, one of those work groups. So the communication PR work group, major task was around communicating with the staff of Equal Justice Initiative, being a liaison, sharing information with our community stakeholders group and our steering committee, as well as local media. We had a community engagement work group that looked at strategies to engage community in some conversations that may be difficult for people to have. So how do you engage the community? How do you engage the public and make it inclusive where all are welcome, everybody's point of view is recognized and valued and appreciated. We have our museum tour group, work group, and that group set up the initial tour. The initial tour, I must say, was March 2019, literally, we made the decision not to go on that tour the week before everybody and everything went into shutdown and lockdown because of the pandemic. We are currently monitoring COVID-19 numbers and hoping to be able to take a group to the museums late spring, early summer, and you'll be hearing more about that. We had the lynching research work group. So one of the requirements from the staff of Equal Justice Initiative was not only to just take their research for face value, but to conduct local research. So reaching out to local historians, reaching out to local community leaders, reaching out to faith-based organizations to see if we could find additional documentation. So in one case, we found that there had been a connection with the family member of one of the lynching victims that had been a minister and had been part of the congregation at St. James Church here in Asheville. And so not only taking face value what the Equal Justice Initiative provided us, but local. And so the other piece of what our research group did was they vetted other potential individuals that might fall within the research qualifications of the EJI. And in one case, it was ruled out and not added in that the individual had actually had a court case, had a hearing, had due process, and then was found guilty and lynched, and therefore did not fit the racial terrorism guidelines of the research of the Equal Justice Initiative. And so we've asked our local research group to hold on to additional documentations of individuals that suffered racial violence in our local communities, but didn't fit the guidelines for this particular project, so that we can do more education around personal and community trauma. We had a logistic historical marker site location work group. Rebecca Brothers was instrumental and with this committee, and Carlos Ramos Kennedy working with this group, looking at various sites that was either at the place where the lynching took place or a location of significance connected to the lynching. And then also researching with the city and county right-of-ways of where, who owned that particular piece of land that we wanted to erect the historical marker. Working with Equal Justice Initiative around the size and the height and the width of the signs, the narrative that would go on the signs, and just all of the ins and out of what it takes to erect a historical marker. We had the essay competition work group that worked with our local high schools. We have over 52 high school students, the largest number that have participated in these essays around racial violence in their communities. We had our educational outreach work group that put together educational programs about our work, the project goals. And then we had the compliance work group that did maintain the checklist. So once you are accepted with the Equal Justice Initiative to form your coalition, and they do ask for a coalition of groups and organizations and individuals working on the project, you receive a checklist, a very substantial checklist of all the things you must do to satisfy the projects. And so our compliance work group really monitored all the work that the other work groups were doing, checking off, being the liaison with the Equal Justice Initiative staff, holding Zoom calls where we did check-ins to make sure we were on target, making sure we were reaching out to the community at large, making sure that we addressed any pushbacks that may have come from the community. And I must say that we were real lucky in terms of Asheville and Buncombe County. We anticipated some uncomfortable conversations around the projects, some possible pushback, but really didn't have any major pushback. The only concerns that we had was from just several of the church members at the particular church, where we wanted to do a soil collection, and that was not major, and we just agreed to do it elsewhere, instead of causing any community disharmony. And so I wanted to speak just a little bit around the various projects. So you have the Racial Justice Essay Project. That's part of the overall. So the Remembrance Project is the overall umbrella project. Within that project, there are 3 separate projects that you heard the ladies on the video replied or mention. So the Racial Justice Essay Project is primarily available to students attending public high schools in the county where the historical marker will be installed. And it is to really, again, engage the community, but also to inform and engage high school students. Students were asked to examine the history of a particular topic of racial injustice and to discuss its legacy today. And so the EJI staff provides a website with many various topics that students can pick one of those topics to write about, or they can work with their individual teachers in their high schools. We were lucky in that we had a number of teachers in our public high schools that taught English, that worked directly with the students. Eric Grant was instrumental, as well as a couple other folks on his committee, in getting students involved and helping them select a topic that was of importance to them. The essays explains why they chose their particular topic or the historical significance of it. They explored how the injustice persists today. And again, I think you heard earlier, we had 52 high school entries with that project. And we were lucky in that, we were able to match the Martin Luther King Jr. Association board decided to, I think we added somewhere between $3,000 and $6,000 additional dollars to the essay contest. We received funding also from the Equal Justice Initiative. So I think we ended up giving away around $15,000 to $17,000 in scholarship money for students that participated in that particular project. Now, those of you that are familiar with the Martin Luther King Jr. Association of Asheville and Buncombe County may know that we also do a Dr. King essay contest. And we were able to, with that contest, I think we gave away another $13,000 to $15,000 in essay contest money to our local high school students. The Soil Collection Project is the second project of the Umbrella Community Remembrance Project. And here we're asked to collect soil from project sites in a very dignified, respectful ceremony that honors the individuals of records that were lynched. Again, the Equal Justice Initiative staff provided us with the narrative summaries. Our research committee went back and forth with the EJI staff around the wording, around clarifying actual locations in some of the articles. They mentioned Asheville in one of the cases, in another they say Weaverville. And so just trying to get the narratives correct before it's placed on the markers. And then we worked around where the actual soil would be collected. So for Mr. Humphreys, it was the intersection of College and South Market Street near the courthouse where the trial would have taken place. And actually, for those of you that are historians, knows that that was in the original courthouse. The original courthouse was down further on Broadway Street, but we just felt like this was a better site in terms of recognition and site locations. River Arts District, Craven Street was for Mr. Rankins that was lynched near the bridge over the French Broad River. And then the old Terrell station at the top of Black Mountain, where the old depot used to be, for Mr. Bob Brackett. He is the one that was hung near the what had been the old school site that is now a church. But he had been pulled out of the jail by the sheriff and placed on a train, trying to get him to Raleigh, where he might receive a fair trial, and was pulled off the train at the old Terrell station there. And so we collected the soil at that site. And so part of our actual soil collection ceremony, so the first picture you see one of the grave sites or ceremony grave sites near the French Broad River, where we collected the soil, placed a flower in honor of the victim, and then covered it over. The second picture is the actual site of the old Terrell train station, of the old depot. And then the bottom three pictures are from the various three soil collection ceremonies that we performed for Mr. Humphreys, Mr. Rankins, and Mr. Brackett. During the historical marker installment ceremony, we again, and so with the soil collection, the jars are provided by the Equal Justice Initiative, and you can order duplicates. And so what we elected to do was we ordered duplicates. And so the original soil, one of the jars goes back to the, Alabama to go into the museum. And then we are able to keep the duplicate jars with the soil in our local areas. And so we will have an exhibit that's been put together in the special collection room where these three jars will be on display, as well as pictures of the soil collection and the soil collection ceremony. The actual historical marker ceremonies, what you're seeing here is on one side of the marker, some of the research around lynchings in America that the Equal Justice Initiative research team put together. And then on the other side of the markers are the historical facts around the individual person. So this is from the installation service of Mr. Humphreys. This is the actual sign, historical marker that is erected in his honor. Mr. Rankin's site is near the French Broad River. The little park there that is at the intersection of Emma Road and Craven Street. And so this was a picture with Dr. Simmons and myself. Dr. Orling Simmons is the president and founder of the Martin Luther King Jr. Association of Asheville and Buncombe County, which we have just celebrated our 41st year of being in operations. And then the sign for Mr. Bob Brackett. So for individuals that might be interested in connecting with the Equal Justice Initiative. And this is on their website also, but you can email the Equal Justice Initiative to begin your journey of truth and justice in the community. The process is once you reach out to them, you're asked to complete an interest form where you list the lead organization, some of your individuals that will be part of the coalition. If you don't have a coalition at that time, you work with the Equal Justice Initiative staff to form a coalition. And then you start determining your project area. And some of the early decisions will be around, are you going to, if you have more than one lynching in your county, are you going to recognize that, have one ceremony where you recognize that individual, as well as one soil collection, one essay contest, or if you have multiple individuals that were lynched, are you going to have multiple ceremonies and recognitions? So the MLK Association with our steering committee elected to have multiple. And so we had 3 individual soil collection process ceremonies that we recognized. And then we had an overall historical marker installation service, and then went to the 3 sites of where the markers were erected. And you know, I would be amiss if I didn't recognize the staff of the city of Asheville for working with us at every step of the process, helping us to look at actual properties, and the work group going out the night before, Friday evening in the rain, to erect the historical marker for the unveiling that following day, that Saturday afternoon. And then you plan and implement your work, again, checking in almost monthly with the Equal Justice Initiatives, their staff. And so our current next steps for the project, we are putting together a series of workshops on community healing. The initial workshops, there's a 3-part series, 90 minutes each, where we are really reaching out to communities of a darker hue, of a darker pigmentation. And I should say, I don't particularly like to say communities of color. So when I do diversity training, equity training, a lot of times I will use the terminology of communities of a darker hue. I do sometimes say communities of color. You know, part of that is just recognizing that not everybody identifies as a person of color. I was actually doing a workshop around equity, and an older, mature, I should say, female participant raised her hand and said, I know you're trying to be politically correct, but I particularly don't like the term community of color. And I said, okay, well, let's use this as a learning point for us, because you know, part of what we're doing is to be inclusive of everybody's voice. And she said, well, I'm old enough to remember the days of for white only signs and for colored only. And so anytime I hear that, it pulls me back to that. And she said, you know, as I understand it, community of color was first used on social media by a group of women with darker pigmentation. And she probably didn't say pigmentation, that's probably my wording there, but that we're trying to distinguish how they are treated different because of their skin color. And their tone, their darker tone. And so I like to say, when we're talking about workshops and healing individuals of a darker hue, individuals of darker pigmentation, just to be as inclusive as everyone. And I know that in some workshops, we'll talk about BIPOC communities, Black, Indigenous, community of color. And again, you will get some pushback where some folks will say, well, the B that stands for Black, I'm not a color, I'm an individual. I've had someone say with the I, Indigenous, where did we come up with that term? And did we ask the Native Americans, the first people, the Indians, etc., what they wanted to be called? And, in further research, a lot of individuals of that background will say, we like to go by our tribe name, the Sioux, the Cherokee, etc. And so I try to be careful when I'm talking about communities and community healings, etc. And so that's part of our learning process, that there's no right or wrong answer as we are developing these healings circles. But we wanted to make sure that we first address some of the concerns that individuals of a darker pigmentation feel comfortable sharing among their own group. And we hope to be able to find funding to expand that then to larger communities, but non-majority communities first, majority communities, and then bringing them together. We also are planning the trips to the Equal Justice Initiative various museums. So they now have the Legacy Museum, and they have the Museum for Peace and Justice. And again, I mentioned earlier, we hope to do that late spring, early summer. I mean, we recognize that particularly COVID-19 and its variants have impacted in communities of darker hue more severely than some of our majority communities. And so, in good conscience, we have paused around putting people on motor coaches and taking them to on a long bus ride. So that's kind of where we are with that. And I wanted to make sure we left plenty of time for sharing and discussion. I know we're slated to go a little bit later, but I wanted to just share that and then open it up for questions or comments. And again, you can have your questions put in the Q&A.
Yeah, we don't have any in there right this minute. I do have 3 questions that
Okay.
I'll run past you. The first one has to do with all those impressive work groups. I'm curious, was that also, did the Equal Justice Initiative provide, and all the guidance that it provided, did it also provide like a template for suggested work groups or how to organize, or was that more or less left up to each project to determine what they felt worked best for them?
Yeah, so that's left up to each project area to find out, to organize best on their communities. And as the chair of our Community Remembrance Project, my background is business, strategic planning, DEI, etc. And so as I read this really thick manual of everything that we had to do, I just looked at it and I said, there is no way, unless we divide and conquer, that we are going to be able to do everything that we need to do. And so to me, it logically fell out into those work groups based on the checklist of things that we had to do. So, in the checklist, it talks about you have to develop strategies to communicate with the community at large and with the city and with the county and etc. And so to me, that immediately said, oh, we need a communication work group that only works on the strategies around that. And then it talks about identifying sites for the historical marker and the pros and cons of private property versus public space, public owned property. And so again, I said, oh, that makes sense to have a logistic committee, and it's highly encouraged that you take a group to the museum. And I said, okay, so that we were fortunate that we had a couple groups in our bigger community stakeholder group that had already been to the museums. There had been a Jewish organization and a couple other faith-based organizations that had gone. And then we had a group that went a few months before the lockdown, a smaller group, several people from MAHAC and a couple of our other partners. And so they then became that particular work group. And so it just kind of organically sprung up based on all of the things we had to check off around the project.
Also was curious, has the project here in Buncombe County communicated with or partnered in any way with other projects in North Carolina, in other counties? Has there been a, kind of a sharing of how to, or information, or this was working, or this is a struggle, or what? I'm just kind of curious if there's been any, and I guess the Equal Justice Institute might possibly encourage that type of communication.
So, and they do, and yes, there has been. So one of the early phases when you do the interest form, the Equal Justice Initiative reaches back out to you to let you know if there's been any other inquiries from other groups in your immediate area that may already be working on the project so that you can partner with them. But they also send you a list of other counties that have completed the project and or individuals that are beginning the process. And so during our installation service, we actually had a representative from the Durham, North Carolina area who they're looking at doing the project, as well as taking a tour of the museum in May. And so their representative came to our historical marker installation ceremony. And then we have followed up sharing information via email, and then actually had a Zoom meeting about 3 weeks ago to share with them our current plans around the healing circles, as well as the museum. We shared with them the hotel that we're planning on staying at that's right across the street, a walking distance of the museum. So a lot of the logistical pieces that we had already collected back in 2019 when we had originally decided to go.
Mm-hmm. And then my last question I have at the moment, and then I see there's 2 questions in the chat we can get to after my last one here, has to do with the exhibit you mentioned. I'm assuming that would be at, you mentioned special collections. I'm assuming that's maybe Buncombe County Special Collections at Pack Library is where that will happen?
That is correct. Pack Library, the Buncombe County Collection Special Room, or seems like they recently changed their name.
They did. I think we're also used to saying the North Carolina room at PAC or something like that. But yeah, they recently changed the Buncombe County Special Collections, they call themselves.
I think that's correct. And so I think they have a current exhibit, and think once that exhibit is over, then we'll rotate in our exhibit.
Okay. All right. So thank you for answering those. I appreciate that, Dr. Fox.
Mm-hmm.
So another question here we have, are the names and stories of the 3 victims of lynching in Buncombe County available online?
They are. So let me get this right. As I recall, they're on the Martin Luther King Jr. website. Is one place. And so if you go to the MLK website, I think it's mlkasheville.org, there under activities is the Buncombe Community Remembrance Project. And so under that, you will see all of the e-newsletters. And as I recall, one of the newsletters contained the actual narrative that's on the historical marker. If you go to YouTube and search MLK Association of Asheville, the actual video of the installation services are on there, as well as the video that you saw that I shared tonight of the 3 ladies from the Equal Justice Initiative. So that's also on the MLK website, and it may also be on our MLK Facebook, but probably the most current is the videos on the MLK YouTube channel.
And one of the folks here is actually asking, please post again where others can see the recordings of this presentation. I will, it's on the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources YouTube channel. There's numerous recordings there, but what I can do, we have the registration information for everyone. So what I can do is send a email, I think afterwards, tomorrow or the day after, sometime later this week. I can send out that recording link to the folks that attended, and then you can do what you would like to do with that email and the information. But I'll send that out to everybody. The link that I could pull up will just be to the YouTube channel, and it will be everything. And I'll send that too as well. But I can send the direct link, and then I can send our YouTube channel link as well. There's probably Dr. Fox and I were talking beforehand, and I went onto our YouTube channel the other day and saw all types of presentations that I didn't know we had recorded across the state that our department is involved in, various programs and projects. So there's actually more stuff there I want to watch as well. Let's see here. Actually,
and Jeff, I'm happy to send you the PowerPoint presentation also, if you would like to post it somewhere or email it out to folks.
That's good to know. And actually, Matt Zaire, who's helping with the this webinar, just posted that link on there too for everybody, the YouTube channel link. So thank you, Matt, for doing that. Actually, let's see. The last one there actually is a comment. Fabulous presentation. Well done. So I'll read that one to you. There you go.
Thank you.
Let's see. There are no other questions. We're really only about 10 minutes away from the stop point from 8 o'clock. So yeah, we'll thank everybody again for attending. You certainly can get in touch with myself and or Dr. Fox if you would like to in the future to ask other questions that may come up. I'd be happy to help with that, or reach out to me and I can help get you in touch with him. Some may know or may not. There's not too many people that would be hearing me say this right now, but the presentation, Dr. Fox will be giving a very similar presentation Thursday, 2 days from now. So hopefully this was a nice run over all that material. You've probably spoken about it before in other venues and such, but yeah, everybody will have an opportunity. Those that couldn't attend today for various reasons, or those that might want to hear some of this information again, pick up on something they may have missed. There'll be another opportunity this coming Thursday, and I think that starts at 6 or 6:30. I can't recall right off the top of my head, but
yeah, and I'm not even going to try to tell you because I have like 3 or 4 presentations in a 7-day period. So
yeah, I understand. You go where your calendar sends you to, right?
Exactly.
Well, again, I thank you so much. I appreciate your time with us, Dr. Fox, and agreeing to speak about this very powerful program. A lot of really, really great information. I certainly took a lot of notes, and quite honestly, before I sign off here, I will say I will look forward to getting back in touch with you a little later this year, because I think there are some opportunities to pursue some similar efforts, I guess you could say, to more publicly recognize those African Americans who died in the construction of the railroad that I'd mentioned earlier, and that other project that probably most folks are familiar with at this point. But yeah, I think there may be some opportunities there to learn from what you all have done in the Equal Justice Initiative, and how to do that in a proper way. So yeah, we appreciate all that. So thank
Jeff,
everybody. Yes.
Jeff, there was one more question from Pat.
Pat.
Yeah, around, are there other activities planned beyond this Thursday? So I know that Jeff just mentioned the railroad project with Dr. Dan Pierce and his group. The MLK Association is currently doing our Rosa Parks recognition awards, where for 4 weeks in a row, we are recognizing 4 individuals that, fit our criteria for that. It's all on our YouTube channel. That's currently going on, and our MLK Association has a COPE program, which is our community outreach empowering group, and they plan activities throughout the year. So they're the ones that are for the end of February and into Women's Month doing the Rosa Parks Awards for the next 4 weeks. I think we announced the first winner this past week. There will be a Juneteenth celebration in June. So just kind of monitor what Jeff and his group is doing on their website, monitor what we're doing on the MLK website. And if you're not subscribed to our e-newsletter, Ron Katz does a fantastic job of not just our events, but events that other organizations are doing. I saw recently that the Jewish Center, I think, is doing a remembrance celebration. So we usually try to include those things in our e-newsletter also. And if you're part of an organization out there and you're having events, please send those to me or Ron Katz, or you can go to the MLK website and go to the activities and the newsletters, and you can subscribe there, and you have Ron's email contact, and you can update him on events that you're having. So that's the quick answer, Pat, and thank you for attending tonight. I always look forward to working with you.
All right. Well, I'd say that covers all the questions in there, and we're just about at time. So again, this is always at these Zoom presentations, ending can sometimes be harder than stopping, that's for sure, or starting. So yeah, so thanks everybody for attending. Thank you again, Dr. Fox, and hope the Thursday's presentation goes very well, and look forward to talking to you at some point soon.
Thank you. Thank
All right.
everyone for participating.
Good night.
Good night.